Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Higher oil prices and the fall in the value of the pound have pushed inflation to its highest level since June 2014. The rate rose to 1.8% last month. As our economics correspondent Andy Verity reports, the cost of living is likely to rise further as companies pass on the higher cost of imports.
Prices may be up, but it's not yet the consumer who's being squeezed hardest. It's the company that sells you the goods, and even more so, the companies that produce them. This East London brewery has boosted prices by 5%, but its costs have risen twice as fast.
We've got auto-enrolment for the pensions coming in this year. We've got a huge business rate increase this year. Our sort of staff overheads are significant. And on top of that, we've now got a weaker pound, so our imported raw material price is going up and up. So it's a real crunch point for us.
In the shops, prices rose by 1.8%. But further up the supply chain, inflationary pressure is building. The price of goods leaving the factory, wholesale prices, are up by 3.5%. And producers aren't yet passing on the much higher cost of raw materials, up by more than a fifth.
Well, I'd remind you that the inflation figure announced this morning at 1.8% is still below the Bank of England's target. The Bank of England Monetary Policy Committee is seeking to manage inflation to maintain itself at or around 2%. So when inflation is at this level, the economy should be working well.
It's worth remembering we've been through one of the tamest periods for inflation since the 1960s. The price of food overall is down 2% on 2 years ago. And if you take vegetables like potatoes, down by 4%. The key question is, with petrol prices rising by 17%, when will these prices start to go up again? So far, retailers are shrugging off higher transport costs, and they're still selling us goods they bought last year at fixed lower prices. When that stock runs out, they'll be faced with an unpalatable choice: absorb the higher cost and watch their profits shrink, or raise prices and accept the risk that customers walk away. Andy Verity, BBC News.
The owner of the French car firm Peugeot says it could buy the Vauxhall and Opel brands from America's General Motors. Here, General Motors employs 4,500 people at its Vauxhall plants in Ellesmere Port and Luton. Our business editor, Simon Jack, reports.
Vauxhall makes 60,000 vans here in Luton every year. It makes another 120,000 cars at Ellesmere Port, and both factories could have a new owner if General Motors sells its European business to the owner of Peugeot and Citroën. Any potential deal would redraw the map of the European car industry. Across Europe, the PSA Group has 14 production sites with 139,000 workers. GM Europe is known as Opel and has 8 factories outside the UK with 39,000 employees. And of course there's Vauxhall in Luton and Ellesmere Port with 4,500 staff. Now these are only talks at the moment, but if a deal did go ahead, putting together Peugeot, Citroën, Vauxhall and Opel, it would be a game changer, creating a giant behind only Volkswagen in European car production. And whenever you get consolidation on that scale, it's bound to cause understandable concern at plants like this in Luton and all around Europe about whether job cuts could be on the horizon.
Cutting costs, I think, would mean closing some plants in Europe to try and get their costs down. If we think about that, then where does that leave the UK, in the sense that we've got flexible labour markets here? General Motors has already indicated that it faces a financial headwind from Brexit. I think there's going to be some vulnerability for the UK plants if this deal goes ahead.
French government owns 14% of PSA, as does the Peugeot family, so the boardroom of a new company would have a very French feel, something not lost on union bosses here.
The French government own a significant chunk of Peugeot. They've already come out and said they welcome the prospect of Peugeot buying Vauxhall Opel, and we want to make certain that our government is not sitting on the sidelines, because you can bet your life that the French government will be defending French jobs.
The government told the BBC tonight it was monitoring the situation. There are a lot of moving parts in this negotiation, but these two manufacturers have collaborated before, and together they hope to assemble a European car giant. Simon Jack, BBC News.
The French car maker Peugeot is in talks to buy Vauxhall and its European Opel business. Vauxhall employs around 35,000 people in the UK, and our business editor Joel Hills is here. If this goes ahead, what would it mean?
Well, it's a big if. We don't know it will at the moment. We've got hold of a letter set by the US boss of General Motors reassuring staff it's business as usual until further notice. But this is concerned because GM's European business has been loss-making for a decade, Mary. It's the Vauxhall and Opel brands. There are about 8 factories across Europe, 2 Ellesmere Port and in Luton. And the union is very concerned tonight. 1, because this is a surprise. It didn't know anything about it. 2, because Peugeot Citroën has a reputation as a cost cutter. And 3, because this operation has been particularly vulnerable ever since our decision to leave the European Union. So it's urging the government to intervene. It's caught the government by surprise, but it's urging the government to intervene. And the General Secretary, Len McCluskey, we're determined to resist if there's any plan to close plants here.
OK, Joel, thank you.
Inflation has reached a 2.5-year high as surging oil prices and the fall in the value of the pound after Brexit combined to push prices higher. The Consumer Price Index jumped 1.8% in January, the highest figure since June 2014. And there's more inflation to come, as our business editor Siobhan Kennedy now reports.
This haulage firm in Ashford in Kent is almost completely dependent on one thing to do its business: petrol. So when the price of oil jumps more than 80% in a year, they're going to feel it.
We had another monthly snapshot of inflation today, and the numbers do not look good. Businesses like these are being hit by price increases not seen in years. And there's a double whammy effect. Not only is the price of oil going through the roof, but thanks to the fall in the value of sterling post-Brexit, the oil is that much more expensive to import.
There are 12 lorries on site delivering everything from steel girders to plant pots across the UK. But the fuel bill to fill up the fleet has risen to £9,000 a week, the majority of which he passes on to his customers.
The cost in running vehicles is going up and up and up. And yeah, so someone's got to pay for it.
Can you continue, do you think, to pass those costs on, or do you not have to sort of stomach some of them yourself?
No, there's no more to stomach. It has to be passed on. You know, we're at a point now where that's what we need to run this company, and that's got to stay at that level.
And do you think your customers will take that?
I think they're fair. They would. Yeah, they will, yeah.
We went to see one of Kevin's customers just 5 minutes down the road. Apter Pottery sells plant pots of all shapes and sizes to garden centres in the UK. So are they happy they're having Kevin's fuel costs to deliver their pots passed on to them?
I think happy would be an exaggeration. We recognise the economic reality, and we will certainly work with our suppliers, but we are not going to be absorbing the full impact of the fuel increase. It's not possible.
But petrol is only half the problem. Apter imports all its pots, mostly from the Far East, and pays in dollars. So the plummeting pound has taken its toll.
If the cost price is increased by 20%, that has to be reflected in the selling price. That's a commercial reality, and if unfortunately it means that we sell a few less of our pots, then I'm afraid that is the situation we'll have to work with.
People are saying, aren't they, politicians, there's no problem, there's no inflation, the economy's not slowing, that post-Brexit we're all fine.
No, but that's because inflation through imported goods is delayed, and as much as 12 months. And I've no doubt at all that we are yet to see the major impact. So talking about it now, that it hasn't affected things, is entirely premature.
All of which means the price of these pots is set to go up. And it's that prospect of inflation hitting us, the consumer, that has the Bank of England worried. Because if they raise interest rates to bring inflation back down, then that will hit our mortgages and our credit cards. And that could make things worse.
So for now, the only option seems to be to sit tight, allow prices to rise and hope the consumer simply doesn't stop spending, a gamble that may not pay off.
So are today's figures a sign that inflation levels could set for a steep rise, for welcome relief for exporters seeking to take advantage of new opportunities post-Brexit? With me now is the Conservative MP and Leave campaigner Kwasi Kwarteng and the economist Vicky Price. Kwasi Kwarteng, let me start with you. Hello. So as you told us on this programme many times, the doomsayers after Brexit got it wrong. Things were actually rather positive. But when it comes to inflation, they might have had a point.
I think inflation is a legitimate thing to raise. But if you look at the round, you're just focusing on one economic figure. Just today, the EU have revised up their figure for UK growth, just as the Bank of England revised up their figures for UK growth.
But inflation does cut into people's spending, doesn't it?
No, it does. I mean, I fully accept that the fall in the pound does lead to potential inflationary outcome. But if you take what was said in the round, where we were meant to find a recession, we were meant to see 500,000 jobs that were lost, we were meant to see house prices collapse 20%. All of that hasn't happened, thankfully. And I think you've got to take the whole picture, the economic picture, as 100% whole, not just look at a tiny slice of it.
And wages are also part of that picture. Will wages rise in line with inflation?
I suspect
no
they
signs so far.
Well, who knows? We'll have to wait and see. But I think the interesting thing is that the GDP figures that you will know and Vicky knows have all been revised up, every single one of them. And that's the big take-home. And we were told that this was a self-made recession. If the British people had the temerity to vote to leave the EU, there would be an immediate recession. And when people say, oh, we haven't left the EU yet, the Brexit budget was not for 2019. That was for last year. And the predictions were for recession in 2016.
Let's turn to Vicky Price. Vicky, I'm not sure if you're one of the doomsayers or not, but are you as relaxed about the economic future as Kwasi Kwarteng is?
I'm afraid I'm not, because, of course, we're not there yet. We haven't had Brexit. But, of course, the uncertainty is now increasing because we're going to be entering this 2-year period of negotiations, and who knows where we'll end up when those are concluded. But, of course, what's going on right now is that the fall in the pound, in a way, it's obviously helped manufacturing exports. There's no doubt about that. So we were
but that's only a small part of the economy,
I'm afraid it's a very small part of the economy. Even if manufacturing output rises by, let's say, 10% this year, it's not going to make a huge difference to the economy as a whole. What really has sustained GDP has been spending by the consumers. And the reason why they've done that is because they've been encouraged by the Bank of England cutting interest rates, by, again, the governor putting huge amounts of liquidity into the system to go out and borrow and spend. And the moment this now looks like being a bit more expensive and their wages are not in fact rising, they're already reining back. If you look at some of the data, retail sales fell in December, for example, and the consumer has already slowed down in terms of the amount that it borrows every month.
This is a problem, isn't it? Kwasi Kwarteng. And I mean, in a sense,
but hang on, I mean,
the pound has sort of become the official opposition to the government and Brexit. Every time Theresa May says something that the markets don't like, the pound has a very volatile reaction. And that is something that's bad for consumers because of inflation, also bad for businesses.
I think I would be very hesitant to be a currency trader, and that's not what I do. But it was very interesting that Vicky mentioned the cut in interest rates. A lot of people, certainly on my side, felt that the cut in interest rates that Mark Carney put forward last year, towards the end of last year, to 0.25%, was perhaps a bit premature. And you can't, on the one hand, complain about inflation and then not sort of attribute it in some part to this very low interest rate. I mean, this is the lowest interest rate in 300 years.
But
and it may well be the case that he has to put it back up to 0.5%, which was the original interest rate until he cut it.
But there will be more pain to come as the real negotiations over Article 50 with the EU start, won't there?
I don't believe that. I think there's a lot of doom-mongering still, a lot of pessimism. We saw an awful lot of it, which I've referred to 6 months ago, before the actual vote. And very much the same people who said we were all going to go to hell in a handcart in 2016 are now saying essentially the same thing. That the negotiations will be prolonged, it'll be difficult, we won't get any good deals, it'll be miserable. And I don't believe it.
But that is exactly what might happen. I talked to Emmanuel Macron, who might be the next French president, yesterday, and he said it will be tough for Britain.
Well, it will be tough, but if we're looking at what may be happening between now and then, there is no doubt that prices are going to have a serious effect on people's consumers' intentions and spending intentions. And that's going to be a serious problem looking ahead. So how the economy is doing by the time we conclude these negotiations, nobody knows, because the uncertainty is also encouraging people to rethink investment decisions. We've seen those slowing down very significantly. The question is whether they pick up again. And on the spending side too, the interesting thing is that suppliers, for the moment, have not been able to pass costs on to the consumer, because, in fact, the consumers become terribly careful about where they spend. And that's a serious issue about whether they can survive.
Got to leave it there. Vicky Price, Kwasi Kwarteng, thanks very much.
I've been getting away soar.